March 15, 1943, 9:40 hours. Zagoin Valley, Tunisia. A thin mist clings to the broken ridgelines, drifting like smoke across the sun-baked desert. German Oberleutnant Karl Weidmann raises his binoculars, scanning the scrubland where his reconnaissance patrol last reported movement. The valley is quiet, too quiet. The only sounds are the idling engines of Panzer III command tanks and the distant thump of artillery somewhere beyond the hills. And then he sees it. A small shape darts from behind a cluster of olive trees, tan-colored, squat, almost comical against the hulking German armor. An M3 Stuart, a light tank so small it looks like a reconnaissance toy placed beside the towering silhouettes of the Afrika Korps. Weidmann lowers the binoculars and smirks. "This is what the Americans send us," he mutters. A children's tank. To the men around him, the Stuart's rounded turret and narrow tracks look laughable. With its short 37mm gun and paper-thin armor, it's nothing compared to the long-barreled German Panzers spread across the valley. But before anyone can joke about it further, the little tank does something unexpected. It moves. Not cautiously, not hesitantly, but fast, blisteringly fast. The Stuart shoots across the valley floor like an angry hornet, kicking sand in a broad tail behind it. You can almost feel the engine revving, hear the grinding gears as the crew inside, young, sweating American tankers from the 1st Armored Division, throw the machine into a tight evasive maneuver. A burst of 50mm fire from a Panzer III rips open the ground where the Stuart had been only a second earlier. The German gunners adjust, firing again, but the little tank is already gone, zigzagging behind a low rise, disappearing like a ghost. Inside the Panzer command net, confusion crackles through the radios. Where did it go? What direction? Was that the same model the British use? It moved too fast, much too fast. Weidmann snaps his head toward the right, movement. But it isn't the Stuart. It's something worse. Smoke, dust, shouting. Then a new voice comes screaming from the rear echelon. "Fuel trucks. We're under fire. The Americans are behind us. Behind them. Impossible." The Afrika Korps supply column, several hundred yards to the rear, tucked safely beyond the initial line of engagement, is erupting in chaos. Drivers are abandoning their trucks. A fuel tanker bursts into flame. Small caliber cannon fire echoes in uneven bursts. The kind of Stuart's fast-firing 37mm makes. Weidmann feels the disbelief punch through his chest. It's the same tank. Somehow, impossibly, it had raced around them. The officers who laughed minutes earlier now scramble onto turrets, shouting orders, trying to orient their panzers toward the sudden threat. But every time a gunner gets a bead on the Stuart, it vanishes behind terrain dips or belts of brush, darting into angles no German tank can match. This isn't a foolish frontal charge. This is a predator using speed as a weapon. And in that moment, as another explosion ripples through the supply line, something else becomes clear. The Americans aren't treating the Stuart like a main battle tank. They're using it like a scalpel. A fast, precise, impossible to pin down scalpel. A second fuel truck goes up in flames, sending a column of black smoke spiraling into the desert sky. German officers stare at it, stunned. The little tank they mocked, this toy, is carving apart the lifeline of their entire position. Weidmann feels the first slip of fear twist in his gut. If a single Stuart can get behind them, how many more are out there? And then his radio operator hears something else, something faint, barely perceptible under the static. The sound of more engines. Fast ones. Closing in. He turns to Weidmann, pale. "Sir, there are more of them." Weidmann doesn't answer. He can't. Because as he lifts his binoculars again, the horizon begins to shimmer, like sunlight glinting off moving metal. Only this time, it isn't one toy tank. It's several. And they're coming in fast. For a moment, the desert holds its breath. The shimmering shapes on the horizon materialize into a line of rapidly advancing vehicles, tan silhouettes dancing through heat distortion. They're low, compact, fast. The same rounded turrets, the same buzzing track rattle that sounds more like an angry insect swarm than a column of armored vehicles. More M3 Stuarts. 5 of them, maybe 6, charging forward in a half-moon formation, kicking up a sweeping wall of dust behind them. You can practically feel the vibrations in the sand, the way the ground trembles beneath their acceleration. German Oberleutnant Weidmann swears under his breath. This isn't a fluke. It's a coordinated strike. At the head of the Stuart formation, Lieutenant James, Red, Harrison leans forward in his cramped turret, one hand on the periscope handles, the other gripping the intercom throat mic. "Keep speed. Keep the dust cloud tight," he barks. They can't hit what they can't see. Inside the tiny American tank, the conditions are suffocating, sweat dripping, metal scorching, air thick with the stench of oil and exhaust, but not one of the crew complains. They're exhilarated, alive, locked in the rhythm of the hunt. Unlike the heavier Shermans, the Stuart wasn't built to slug it out. It was built to move, to sprint, to outthink rather than overpower. And Lieutenant Harrison knows exactly what he's doing, creating chaos, forcing the Afrika Korps to rotate their turrets and abandon their carefully aligned firing arcs. Every second a German tank isn't aimed forward is a second the Stuart's exploit. Harrison raises his binoculars briefly, just long enough to see the plume of black smoke where the first fuel truck burned. That explosion wasn't the goal. It was only the beginning. Target the soft lines, not the armor, Harrison reminds his driver. Or cutting the head off the snake. Behind him, Stuart crews fan out, peppering half-tracks and supply wagons with 37mm fire, shredding water carriers, tearing through ammunition trucks, scattering infantry like startled birds. Each hit is precise, brutal, and economical. The Afrika Korps tanks finally pivot to face the new threat, but they're too slow. A Panzer III rotates its turret, gun barrel lowering, engine revving, but the Stuart has already darted behind a small ridge, reappearing seconds later at the German vehicle's exposed flank. A short burst of cannon fire clangs harmlessly off German armor, but that isn't the point. The point is distraction. Weidmann watches in disbelief as his armored line, trained, disciplined, and battle-hardened, begins to fracture under the pressure of these toy tanks, weaving like wasps. The radio erupts. They're everywhere. I can't track them. Dust is too thick. Fuel line hit, pulling back. Where's our air support? Where is it? No answer. Not yet. Weidmann clenches his fist. This wasn't how Tunisia battles were supposed to go. German doctrine depended on control, on dictating the tempo. But right now, the tempo belongs entirely to the Americans. One Stuart breaks formation, rushing toward a narrow defile where a cluster of German fuel trucks had taken refuge. Its driver slams the pedals, pushing the light tank to its limits, engine howling, treads spitting sand. The gunner squeezes off a perfectly timed round, 37mm shell striking the lead truck and turning it into a fireball that lights the entire ravine like a furnace. The explosion sends a shockwave rolling over the valley. Even the distant German command elements hear it. The Afrika Korps soldiers, so confident in their armor and training, turn to see another black column twisting skyward. The lieutenant whispers, almost to himself. What are these Americans doing? Weidmann knows the answer, though he doesn't want to admit it. They're fighting a different war. Not a duel between heavy armor and firepower. But a war of movement, speed, and disruption. The Stuarts aren't trying to destroy panzers. They're ripping out the logistical heart that keeps those panzers alive. For the first time that morning, the German lines aren't just confused, they're isolated. And then, as if the Americans had planned the moment down to the second, another sound enters the valley. Distant at first, then rising. A low drone. Aircraft. But not German. A pair of American A-20 Havoc light bombers swoop over the ridge, their silhouettes cutting across the haze. The Stuarts had not been an attack. They had been the opening move. Weidmann looks up, stunned, the realization stabbing through him. This wasn't a reckless American charge. It was a trap. And his entire command is standing in the kill zone. With subtlety. It drops out of the sun with a roar that shakes the valley, engines screaming as it banks hard and rolls into its attack run. The German officers scatter instinctively, shouting orders drowned beneath the howl of the aircraft. You can almost hear the metallic clatter inside the bomber, the bomb bay doors opening, the internal racks releasing their deadly cargo. 3 dark shapes tumble downward. A moment of silence. Then, boom, boom. Boom. The ground convulses. Dust and shrapnel whip across the valley in a choking cloud. A Panzer III rocks violently under the blast wave, its crew thrown off balance. The half-track is flipped onto its side like a child's toy. The second Havoc follows right behind, strafing the scrambling infantry with blistering .50 caliber machine gun fire that chews lines through the sand. German units dive for whatever cover they can find, Craters, burned-out trucks, shallow depressions, but nothing is stable, nothing feels safe. Because the Stuarts are still moving. Gov. Lieutenant Governor Harrison watches the airstrike unfold through his periscope, the bomb flashes reflecting off the metal inside the cramped turret. He doesn't cheer, he doesn't need to. This was always the plan: create confusion, identify high-value targets, pin the Afrika Korps in place, then let the bombers finish the job. Driver, swing us left, Harrison says calmly. Let's keep those Panzers guessing. The Stuart leaps forward once more, pivoting around a cluster of rocks and tearing into the flank of a German mortar team. The gunner fires a burst that shreds the crew, forcing the survivors to flee. To the Germans, the Stuarts no longer look like toys. They look like predators. And every predator hunts with intent. Weidmann's face is streaked with dust and sweat as he tries to re-establish some semblance of order. He yells into his headset, struggling to reach his battalion commander, Grossfeldwebel Reinhold Kruger, but the radio net is overrun with overlapping cries. Panzer 214 disabled. We've lost the fuel column. They're hitting the rear again, more Stuarts. Air attack, air attack. Weidmann slams his fist against the turret interior. They had walked straight into an American tempo they couldn't match. The Afrika Korps, usually so composed, was unraveling under the combined weight of relentless speed on the ground and surgical strikes from above. He glances at a map pinned to the turret wall. Their reinforcements are 2 hours away. They won't make it in time. A sudden metallic thud snaps his attention back to reality as a 37mm round ricochets off his Panzer's frontal armor. He spins toward the source, and sees a lone Stuart perched on a shallow rise, turret rotated, gun pointed directly at him. The audacity is stunning. A single light tank challenging a German command vehicle at close range. Weidmann's gunner reacts instantly, heaving the heavy breech shut and preparing to fire. But the Stuart isn't waiting. It fires again, the shell pinging off the Panzer's mantlet, doing no real damage but keeping the crew rattled and distracted. Seconds matter. And the Stuart just stole them. Behind Weidmann, another explosion rips open a line of ammunition wagons. Flames shoot 20 feet into the air, showering the valley with sparks and debris. The Afrika Korps backbone, their supplies, their coordination, their rhythm, is collapsing. Weidmann finally gives the order he never expected to give here, in Tunisia, against Americans he once considered inexperienced. Pull back. All units, fall back to secondary positions. Now. But retreating under chaos is difficult. Retreating under chaos and while being hunted is nearly impossible. A German fuel truck attempts to flee the kill zone, its engine whining as it rushes toward a narrow pass. It almost makes it, until a Stuart bursts into view from the left, cutting across its path and firing a single, well-placed shot into its side. The truck erupts in a mushroom of burning fuel. The path is sealed. The Germans are trapped in their own choke point. The Havocs bank away, their bomb racks empty, leaving only the smell of cordite and burning rubber behind. But the damage is done. The desert basin is now a graveyard of shattered vehicles and ruptured supply lines. The Stuarts slow their pace, engines idling as they reposition behind scattered rocks and ridges. Waiting, watching, knowing the next move is up to the Germans. Weidmann stares into the rising smoke, dread creeping into his bones. This wasn't a battle. It was a message. The Americans had shown him, shown all of them, exactly how deadly speed, coordination, and intent could be in the North African desert. And he knows, with a sinking certainty, that the next phase is about to begin. For a long moment, the valley is eerily quiet, nothing but the crackle of burning fuel and the low groan of damaged engines ticking as they cool. Smoke drifts like ghostly curtains, twisting in the desert wind. Through it, the silhouettes of the M3 Stuarts appear and disappear, pacing along the ridges like restless animals. Weidmann wipes the grit from his eyes and forces himself to think. Retreat is chaos. Staying is suicide. What option is left? He looks toward the western ridge, his secondary defensive line. In theory, it's a fallback strongpoint. In reality, without fuel, without ammunition, without cohesion, it's just another patch of sand. But he has no choice. Signal all remaining units, he orders. We move west. Now. His radio operator hesitates. Sir, if we move west, we expose our right flank. Weidmann inhales sharply. He knows. The Americans know it too. Far across the valley, Lieutenant James, Red, Harrison watches the German hesitation like a chess player studying an opponent's trembling hand. He lowers his periscope and leans into the dim red light inside the Stuart's turret. "They're pulling back," he murmurs. "Just like we expected." His crew can't see his expression, but they can hear the change in his voice, the shift from frenzy to focus, from adrenaline to cold calculation. "All right boys," Harrison says, "time for phase 3. The driver, Corporal Dunn, wipes sweat from his brow. "Sir, you mean, cut them off," Harrison finishes. "Before they reorganize." The Stuart lurches forward once more. For a moment you can almost feel the crew's pulse sinking with the clatter of the treads. They know this next maneuver is the most dangerous. The Germans, wounded and furious, still have teeth. And a single direct hit from a Panzer III would shear the Stuart open like a tin can. But that's the thing about light armor crews in North Africa. They survived on nerve. Weidmann's retreating column begins to move, slowly, disjointed, the damaged panzers struggling to form any real formation. Tank engines roar. Orders fly. Men shout. But it's all happening too slowly. The Afrika Korps had entered the day with confidence, solid positions, reliable armor, and the promise of reinforcements. Now they're limping through a valley that feels like it belongs to someone else. As the first German tanks crest the western rise, a crackle of machine gun fire rips across the desert floor. Not from the rear, not from the air, from ahead. Weidmann's breath catches. No, it can't be. But it is. Several Stuarts sit on the high ground directly in front of his escape route, the very ridge he hoped to retreat to. Their turrets are trained on the bottleneck, blocking the exit like a set of teeth snapping shut. Harrison is among them, perched atop a sandstone outcrop, engine low, cannon loaded. He speaks calmly into his throat mic. "Gentlemen, welcome to the last place you wanted to be." The German retreat line jolts to a halt. Panzers reverse, pivot, bunch up. One of the worst situations for armored vehicles, especially in a constrained valley. They're pinned. Correction. They've been herded. The Stuarts from the valley floor approach from behind, tightening the noose. The ones on the ridges tighten the front. What started as a probing attack has now become something far more devastating. A classic envelopment. A trap born not from brute strength, but from speed and intention. One German commander tries to break the line, driving his panzer straight toward the ridge. The turret fires blind, sending shells soaring wildly over the Stuarts. But before he can climb the slope, two light tanks dart across his flank, hitting his tracks, stalling his engine. The panzer slews sideways, helpless. Weidmann feels his throat go dry. This is no longer a battlefield. It's a slaughter pen. And yet, the Americans aren't firing to destroy. Not entirely. Their shots are precise, disabling tracks, puncturing fuel tanks, blowing supply crates. They want the Germans immobile. Frozen. Done. A realization hits Weidmann like a hammer to the chest. The smoke settles into the folds of the valley like a dark tide. German engines sputter, cough, and die one by one. The air is thick, hot metal, scorched rubber, the sharp sting of cordite still drifting under the desert sun. A faint wind pushes the haze aside, revealing a scene that would have been unthinkable an hour earlier. German tanks, pride of the Afrika Korps, sit immobilized. Some disabled, some abandoned, all surrounded. And at the edges of the field, circling with calm precision, the M3 Stuarts prowl like small, confident wolves guarding a kill. Weidmann slowly removes his headset. The harsh static fades into distant rumbling. He leans out of his turret, hands raised just enough to show he isn't reaching for a weapon. His face is streaked with dust and disbelief. Across the wreck-strewn basin, American crews are stepping out of their light tanks, weapons ready but relaxed. They move with the practiced ease of soldiers who have done the impossible and know it. But for the Germans, something far more unsettling hangs in the air. This wasn't luck. This wasn't chaos. This was a doctrine. Lieutenant Governor James, Red, Harrison climbs out of his Stuart, boots hitting the hot sand. He stretches his aching back and pulls off his helmet, revealing sweat-matted hair and the weary grin of a man who just bet everything and won. His gunner swings out behind him. "Sir, you think they'll try anything?" Harrison shakes his head. "They've got nothing left to try." He's right. The Germans stand isolated, cut off, dehydrated, shaken by the speed and ferocity of the American maneuver. Many of them stare at the Stuarts with an expression that is half shock, half respect. One captured Feldwebel mutters to himself, almost too quietly to hear. They were supposed to be scouts. Small tanks. Not this. Harrison hears him. He smiles faintly. That's what you were banking on. If this moment feels like a reversal of everything the Afrika Korps believed about American armor, it's because it is. For most of the war, German tank doctrine was built around the idea that tanks fought tanks. Armor against armor, gun against gun, weight against weight. The Panzer III and IV were engineered for this kind of duel. Even the mighty Tiger followed the logic. The heaviest armament, the strongest armor, the decisive fist. The Americans didn't bring a fist today. They brought a scalpel. A fast, nimble, almost underestimated tool that had no business fighting a Panzer head-on, and so it didn't. Instead, the Stuarts targeted the real organs of war. Fuel, water, ammunition, communications, routes of escape. They didn't challenge the German tanks. They starved them. Speed over strength, mobility over mass, disruption over destruction. And for the first time in North Africa, the Afrika Korps is feeling a sensation they've rarely known. March 29, 1943, 1840 hours. The ridgeline west of Jebel El Abayad glows gold under a dying Tunisian sun. Dust hangs in the air like smoke, drifting in long ribbons across the battlefield. The distant thunder of artillery rolls across the plain, slow, methodical, confident. German confidence. From a shallow wadi below the ridge, Lieutenant Harris peers through his binoculars, elbows dug into warm sand. His breath is steady, but his knuckles go white around the metal. Up on the ridge, silhouetted against the sunset, sit 3 German Panzer IVs, their engines idling, their turrets scanning the horizon like patient wolves. Behind Harris, the M3 Stuarts idle quietly, small silhouettes in the lengthening shadows. Their engines hum, contained, restrained, like sprinters waiting for the starter pistol. Harris lowers the binoculars. He knows this is a gamble. His men know it too. But they trust him, because every time he's gambled with the little Stuart, the Germans have come out looking like fools. He climbs onto the hull of his tank. The metal is warm, almost hot, from the sun. He doesn't bother with a long briefing. He just leans down into the turret and mutters. Same plan. Speed is everything. We hit them before they know we're real. Private Ortega, the gunner, grins. Sir, those Panzers are gonna be very upset. The men laugh quietly. Nerves, fear, trust, all braided together. Above them, the Panzer IVs shift formation, a sign they're preparing to advance under the assumption that the valley below is empty. The German commander clearly decided that whatever American armor was in this sector had pulled back. Why wouldn't he? No real tank could hide this close. But the Germans still didn't understand the Stuart. Not really. Not the way the Americans did. The little tank wasn't a shield. It wasn't a hammer. It was a needle, fast, sharp, and where it wasn't supposed to be. Harris taps the turret roof twice. Engines growl. Tracks begin turning. The Stuarts rise from the wadi like ghosts. And then, they sprint. Sand erupts behind them as the tanks surge forward, engines screaming at full throttle. 50, 55, 60 kilometers per hour, far beyond anything a Panzer could ever hope to match over rough ground. By the time the Germans hear the roar, the Stuarts are halfway up the slope. Lieutenant Weber, commanding the German Panzer element, snaps his head toward the sound. What he sees makes no sense. Tiny American tanks rushing straight uphill toward him, reckless, fast, almost joyous in their aggression. He shouts for his crews to rotate turrets. But the Stuarts are already weaving, zigzagging like race cars avoiding obstacles only they can see. Rounds whistle over them, smashing into dirt, throwing up fountains of dust. A Panzer shell barely misses Harris's tank, passing so close it rattles the bolts on the turret. You can almost feel his heartbeat spiking, but he doesn't slow down. At 200 meters, Ortega fires the first shot, not at the Panzer, but at a fuel drum stack beside a German half-track parked behind them. The explosion is enormous. Flames leap into the sky. The ridge turns into a storm of fire and silhouettes. The Panzers lose their night vision instantly. Harris whispers, now. The Stuarts split, 2 darting left, 2 right, 1 punching straight through the smoke. The Germans can't track all of them. They can barely track 1. And then, the moment everything changes. A Panzer IV tries to pivot, turret rotating, hull grinding forward, but the Stuart on its flank is already behind it, close enough to touch the engine plate. Ortega fires point blank. The Panzer erupts in a bloom of flame. A second Stuart races past the burning wreck, firing on the move, its tracer rounds streaking across the twilight. The ridge is chaos, German officers screaming orders, smoke choking the air, firelight painting the rocks orange and red. And the Stuarts, they're everywhere, and nowhere. The toy tanks are carving up veteran German armor like sharks ripping into a slow-moving whale. By 1849 hours, less than 10 minutes after the first engine revved, all three Panzer IVs are knocked out or abandoned. Silence returns slowly, creeping across the ridge like a cautious animal. Harris stands in his open hatch, chest rising and falling, trying to steady his breath. The sun has dipped below the horizon now, leaving only the glow of fires and the cold blue of early night. Below him, the valley the Germans thought was undefended is now theirs. But something else has happened too, something the German high command will not be able to ignore. For the first time in the Tunisia campaign, captured German officers will report. Greater than, the American light tanks do not behave like tanks. They behave like cavalry. A warning, a realization, a shift in how the Germans viewed the Allied threat. And from this moment on, the Stuart would never again be dismissed as a child's toy. But the greatest shock, the one that truly rattled German command, was still to come. Because the Stuarts weren't finished. Not even close. Being outmaneuvered. Weidmann climbs down from his crippled Panzer III, boots crunching against spent shell casings and shattered truck parts. As he approaches the American line, he catches sight of Harrison standing atop his Stuart, arms crossed, eyes calm. The two men lock eyes. Neither speaks. They don't need to. In that quiet stare, the truth settles like desert dust. The Germans didn't lose to a tank. They lost to an idea. An idea that didn't match their expectations. An idea they dismissed. An idea born from American improvisation, speed, and sheer audacity. The Stuart wasn't meant to dominate the battlefield. It was meant to disrupt it. And today, it had flipped the entire Tunisian front on its head. But the deeper shock, the revelation that will echo through German command in the coming days, arrives slowly, like a creeping shadow along the dunes. Reports begin filtering back. Intelligence summaries. Field notes from Panzer commanders. Radio traffic from broken units still trying to regroup. And one phrase appears again and again. Americans are using reconnaissance armor as assault elements. Unpredictable movement patterns. Enemy armor prioritizes logistics over engagement. Unorthodox. Effective. Dangerous. What began as mocking laughter at a toy tank has become something far more serious. Fear. Because the Afrika Korps now understands that the Americans aren't playing the same game. They aren't bound by German doctrine. They aren't impressed by German armor. They're improvisers, innovators, wildcards. And wildcards are unpredictable. Weidmann feels the weight of this realization settle over him as he stands in the heat, hands raised, watching his men disarm under American oversight. He looks again at the small, battered Stuart sitting on the ridge, sun glinting off its sloped hull. A tank he once mocked. A tank that humiliated an entire armored detachment. A tank that forced him to rethink everything. The desert wind sweeps across the valley, carrying the smell of smoke and the echo of a single, inescapable truth. The Americans intend to capture this entire retreating force intact. That's why they aren't going for kill shots. That's why they're surrounding instead of annihilating. That's why the bombers hit the ground early, not late. The Stuarts weren't improvising. They were executing a plan. A bold one. A risky one. And for the first time, a plan that was working against the Afrika Korps instead of for them. Smoke rolls across the valley as the German line stalls completely. Panzer crews are stepping out, hands partly raised, unsure whether to flee or fight. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the desert that make the Stuarts look larger, more menacing than their thin armor should allow. Weidmann lowers his binoculars. The day has turned. The desert has turned. And so, too, has the war. But one question remains in the air, heavy, suffocating, inevitable. How did the Americans learn to fight like this? The answer is coming. And it will hit even harder than the Stuarts themselves.